Hi, it's an honor to be here with you today at NHSMUN-Mexico. Mexico's role in the world, its place in international relations, has always been a complicated matter. We are a big country. We are a country with a proud history, with many traditions, with enormous cultural wealth. But we are also a country that has always been placed in a dichotomy, close to the United States, on the border with the United States, with the world's most powerful and richest nation for now well over a century. And at the same time, by tradition, by culture, by language, by religion, much closer in many ways to Latin America. So Mexico's role in the world has always been determined by our relationship on the one hand with the United States, on the other hand with Latin America, and since 1945, after World War II, in the way we manage ourselves and the way we manage our participation in the multilateral arena, and in particular in the United Nations and all its specialized agencies. I'll start with the United States because it's closest, and in a sense it's perhaps the relationship I know best. The asymmetrical nature of that relationship is obvious to everyone and has been obvious at least for a century now. There is no way that there can be a true equality among nations with such a different size of population, geographical size, natural resources, wealth, or of course, economic power. So Mexico has always had to manage this asymmetrical relationship, this relationship where we never have the wherewithal, we never have the size or the power to truly deal on an equal footing with the United States on any issue, whether this be trade, drugs, migration, tourism, security, etc. We always have tried to manage the relationship the best we can. Manage it by, on occasion, standing up to the United States and saying, we will not accept these demands of yours. On other occasion, accepting demands but hoping to dilute them, to water them down. And on other occasions, still basically going along with the United States on most of what it wants from Mexico, because we simply do not have the strength, we do not have the wealth, we do not have the size to truly be able to resist American entreaties or American pressure. One of the ways we have tried to manage this relationship and to balance it with other relationships has been precisely with Latin America, a region where by history, by religion, by culture, even by language, with the exception of Brazil, we have a great deal in common, even though our trade and financial and tourism flows are minor, minuscule even, compared with those we have with the United States. But Mexico has traditionally tried to establish close relationships, mainly of a political and cultural nature, with the countries of Latin America as a way of balancing our relationship with the United States, which, as I just said, tends to be overwhelming. So with the countries of Latin America, or Central America and the Caribbean in particular, we try to establish close political ties. We have done so in the past, over the last 70 or 80 years at different times, with Chile, with Cuba, sometimes with Brazil. It's always a bit more complicated because we're rivals because of size and ambition. Now currently with Argentina, but also with the smaller countries of Central America, where many Latin Mexican administrations, at least since the late 20th century, have attempted to create some kind of economic, financial, and trade proximity with our neighbors to the south and in the Caribbean, with Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and to a lesser extent, Cuba and the Dominican Republic. Sometimes this has worked, sometimes it hasn't. Sometimes we have been able to counterbalance the asymmetry with the United States by our closeness to some Latin American countries. But sometimes we have irritated the United States, or the United States has gotten needlessly irritated with us because of our closeness to certain countries. This was true, for example, in the case of Cuba in the 1960s, in the case of Nicaragua and El Salvador in the 1980s, and perhaps again today in the case of Cuba and Venezuela. But what's important here is to emphasize that Mexico always tries to have as close a relationship as possible with Latin America, even if we know that it's very difficult, that economic, financial, trade forces are centrifugal forces. They are driving us apart over time, not bringing us together with the Latin Americans. On the contrary, they are driving us together with the United States. Since 1945 and the creation of the United Nations, Mexico has always tried to play a role somewhat above its size, to punch above its weight, if you like, in the United Nations, in New York in particular, and in the specialized agencies, be they UNESCO, the FAO, the International Court of Justice, the Human Rights Commission, then Council, etc., in Geneva. Why have we done this? For many reasons, but perhaps the most important one is that we knew from the very beginning, the creation of the UN system, that this was an alternative to our balancing act with Latin America. This was a way in which we could reach out to countries in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, and try and find common ground with them on a series of issues which would allow us once again to bring different actors and different forces into our relationship with the United States. So we began to be as active as possible at the United Nations from the late 40s onward. We participated in the United Nations Security Council in the late 40s, although we suspended this for many reasons, not all of them very good reasons, until 1981, when we joined the Security Council for a second time for 2 years, then again in 2002 and 2003, when we joined the Security Council for the third time, again in 2008, 2009, and today in the year 2021 and 2022, where we are non-permanent members of the Security Council. But Mexico's role in the United Nations has not been limited to the Security Council. We have played a very important role in disarmament talks, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which is not strictly speaking a UN affair, the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea in the 1970s and partly in the 80s, and in the specialized agencies. One of the first directors of UNESCO was Mexican, our Foreign and Education Minister, Jaime Torres Bodet, and we have tried to be also active, sometimes with difficulties, at the United Nations Human Rights Councils or Commission in Geneva. Why? Well, because we have a contradiction there with our stance on human rights and in the United Nations in general. On the one hand, Mexico has a tradition, which I think is now obsolete, anachronic, of sustaining the principle of non-intervention. And on the other hand, we want to defend human rights in the international arena. These two attempts, these two hopes or ambitions often are at cross purposes, and it's not easy to conciliate them. In any case, we have done what we could at the United Nations. We continue to be active. We will be active in the future. And with this quick summary, you have an idea then of what Mexico's place in the world has been and will continue to be. Strongly related to the United States. That's where the main forces are driving us: economic, trade, financial, tourism, technological, energy, climate change, etc. But with as much of a relationship as possible with Latin America, and as most active participation as possible in the United Nations system in general, and the United Nations in New York in particular. And I hope that many of you who are listening will find Mexico's role at the United Nations an interesting one. It is always the object of a lot of study, a lot of theses, a lot of papers, a lot of dissertations, and I hope in your future you may find it interesting to carry out some research on this matter. Thank you very much for your time, and I wish you the very, very best in your endeavors.